What would you do if the man you loved, the man you trusted with your heart, your family, and your future, betrayed you over and over again? Hi, I'm Sarah, and this is the story of how I did the unthinkable to get back at my cheating husband. But let me warn you, this isn't just a story about infidelity. It's about revenge, desperation, and a decision that changed my life forever. My husband, Dr. Michael Carter, is a well-respected gynecologist in Chicago. To the outside world, he's the perfect man, successful, charming, and devoted to his family. But behind closed doors, he's a serial cheater. I've caught him in lies, found texts from other women, and even walked in on him with a nurse at his hospital. Each time I forgave him. I tried therapy. I begged him to change. I did everything to save our marriage, but nothing worked. Then one night, I had an idea. A plan so shocking, so twisted that even I couldn't believe I was considering it. I decided to get revenge by stripping for our 17-year-old son. This is the story of how I crossed a line I never thought I'd cross, and how it all came crashing down. Let me take you back to where it all began. Michael and I met in college. He was charming, ambitious, and had this way of making me feel like I was the only woman in the room. We got married right after he finished medical school, and for a while, life was perfect. We had a beautiful home in Lincoln Park, Chicago, and our son, Ethan, was the light of our lives. Michael's career was thriving. He became one of the most sought-after gynecologists in the city. But as his career grew, so did his ego and his secrets. The first time I caught him cheating, Ethan was just 10 years old. It was a nurse from his hospital. I found texts on his phone, flirty, inappropriate, and undeniable. When I confronted him, he broke down. He said it was a mistake, that he was stressed at work, and that it would never happen again. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. For the sake of our family, I forgave him. But it did happen again and again. Over the years, I caught him with coworkers, patients, and even strangers he met online. Each time, he'd apologize, promise to change, and beg for another chance. And each time, I'd give it to him. I told myself I was doing it for Ethan, for our family. But deep down, I was just scared. Scared of being alone. Scared of starting over. Scared of what people would think if they found out the perfect Dr. Carter was anything but perfect. By the time Ethan turned 17, I was exhausted. I'd spent years trying to fix a marriage that was beyond repair. I'd cried myself to sleep more times than I could count, and I'd lost all sense of who I was. I wasn't Sarah anymore. I was just Michael's wife, Ethan's mom, and the woman who kept forgiving a man who didn't deserve it. Then one night, everything changed. Michael came home late, again. He smelled like perfume, again. And when I confronted him, he didn't even bother to lie. He just shrugged and said, "What do you want me to do, Sarah? I'm a man. I have needs." Those words broke something inside me. For years, I'd put up with his cheating, his lies, his excuses. But this was different. This was him admitting that he didn't care. Not about me, not about our marriage, not about our family. I stormed out of the house that night, driving aimlessly through the streets of Chicago. I didn't know where I was going or what I was going to do. All I knew was that I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay. And then, as I sat in my car outside a dimly lit strip club, an idea came to me. A dark, twisted idea that I couldn't shake. If Michael could betray me, if he could destroy our family without a second thought, then why should I play by the rules? Why should I be the one to suffer while he got to live his life without consequences? That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to cry anymore. I wasn't going to beg anymore. I was going to get revenge. And the person I chose to help me do it? My own son, Ethan. The next morning, I woke up with a knot in my stomach. The idea that had seemed so bold, so daring the night before now felt terrifying. Could I really go through with this? Could I really use my own son to get back at Michael? But every time I thought about backing out, I remembered the look on Michael's face when he said, "I'm a man. I have needs." That look, that cold, dismissive look, was all the motivation I needed. I started small. That evening, I put on a dress that was a little tighter, a little shorter than what I usually wore. I made sure Ethan was in the living room when I walked in. He was sitting on the couch, playing video games, barely looking up when I entered, but I could feel his eyes on me as I walked past. I didn't say anything, I didn't have to. The dress said it all. The next night, I went a step further. I wore a silk robe, the kind that barely covers anything, and accidentally let it slip off my shoulder while I was making dinner. Ethan was at the kitchen table doing homework. I saw him glance at me, then quickly look away, his cheeks turning red. I pretended not to notice, but inside I felt a strange mix of guilt and satisfaction. It was working. Over the next few weeks, I pushed the boundaries further. I started dancing around the house when Ethan was home, letting my movements become a little more suggestive. I'd catch him watching me from the corner of his eye, his face flushed, his hands fidgeting. He never said anything, but I could tell he was confused, maybe even a little scared, and honestly, so was I. What was I doing? Was I really going to go through with this? Then, one night, everything changed. Michael was working late again, and Ethan and I were alone in the house. I'd had a glass of wine, just enough to loosen my inhibitions, and I decided to take things to the next level. I put on a playlist of sultry songs, turned the lights down low, and started dancing in the living room. I could feel Ethan's eyes on me, but this time I didn't pretend not to notice. I looked right at him, my movements slow and deliberate, my eyes locked on his. For a moment, he just sat there, frozen. Then, without a word, he got up and left the room. I heard his bedroom door slam shut, and I stood there, my heart pounding, wondering if I'd gone too far. But the next morning, something strange happened. Ethan didn't avoid me like I thought he would. Instead, he seemed different, more attentive, more curious. He started finding excuses to be near me, to touch me, a hand on my shoulder, a brush of his arm against mine. It was subtle, but it was there, and I didn't stop it. That's when I realized something terrifying. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about power. For the first time in years, I felt like I had control over something, over someone, and I hated how much I liked it. But as the weeks went by, things started to spiral out of control. Ethan's behavior became more intense, more unpredictable. He started coming into my room at night, claiming he couldn't sleep. He'd sit on the edge of my bed, his eyes darting around the room, his hands fidgeting. I knew what he wanted, but I didn't know how to stop it. I'd created this monster, and now I didn't know how to put it back in its cage. Then one night, it all came to a head. Ethan walked into my room while I was getting ready for bed. He didn't say anything, just stood there, staring at me with this look in his eyes, a look that made my stomach twist. "Mom," he said, his voice trembling, "I can't stop thinking about you." In that moment, I realized I'd made a terrible mistake. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't justice. This was a disaster I had no idea how to fix. I stood there frozen as Ethan's words hung in the air. "I can't stop thinking about you." My mind raced, trying to process what he'd just said. This wasn't supposed to happen. This wasn't part of the plan. I'd wanted to hurt Michael, to make him feel even a fraction of the pain he'd caused me. But this was something else entirely. This was my son, my baby, standing in front of me, his eyes filled with a mix of desire and confusion, and I had no one to blame but myself. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "Ethan," I said, my voice trembling, "this isn't right. We can't do this." He looked at me, his face crumpling with hurt. "But you started it," he said, his voice breaking. "You're the one who—" He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't have to. I knew exactly what he meant. I was the one who had crossed the line. I was the one who had blurred the boundaries between us. And now, I didn't know how to fix it. That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything that had happened over the past few weeks. How had I let it get this far? How had I been so blind to the damage I was causing? I thought I was punishing Michael, but all I'd done was hurt Ethan and myself. The following day, I knew I had to do something. I couldn't let this continue. I couldn't let my son suffer because of my mistakes. I called Dr. Rachel Bennett, a family therapist I'd heard about from a friend. I didn't know if she could help us, but I knew we couldn't do this alone. The first session was awkward, to say the least. Ethan barely said a word, his arms crossed, his eyes fixed on the floor. I did most of the talking, trying to explain what had happened without making excuses for myself. Dr. Bennett listened patiently, her calm demeanor helping to ease some of the tension in the room. When I finished, she looked at Ethan and said, "How are you feeling about all of this?" For a long time, he didn't answer. Then, finally, he looked up, his eyes filled with tears. "I don't know," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what's happening anymore." That was the breakthrough we needed. Over the next few weeks, we continued therapy, slowly unraveling the tangled web of emotions and mistakes that had brought us to this point. Ethan started to open up, talking about the loneliness he'd felt since Michael's infidelity had torn our family apart. He talked about the confusion he'd felt when I started crossing boundaries and the guilt he'd carried for not being able to stop it. As for me, therapy forced me to confront the choices I'd made, the ways I'd let my own pain and anger dictate my actions. I realized that I hadn't just been trying to hurt Michael, I'd been trying to fill the void he'd left in my life, and in doing so, I'd hurt the one person who mattered most: my son. It wasn't easy. There were days when I wanted to give up, days when the guilt felt too heavy to bear. But slowly, things started to get better. Ethan started spending more time with friends, joining a local basketball league, and even started seeing a therapist on his own. I could see him changing, growing stronger, more confident, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope. As for Michael, I finally filed for divorce. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I realized that staying in a toxic marriage wasn't just hurting me, it was hurting Ethan too. And I owed it to both of us to start fresh, to build a life that wasn't defined by Michael's mistakes, or my own. Now, as I sit here, reflecting on everything that's happened, I know I've made mistakes, big ones, but I also know that I'm not the same person I was back then. I've learned the importance of boundaries, of communication, and of taking responsibility for my actions. And most importantly, I've learned that revenge is never the answer. It doesn't heal. It doesn't fix. It only destroys. If there's one thing I want you to take away from my story, it's this. As parents, we have a responsibility to protect our children, not just from the world, but from ourselves. When we're hurt, when we're angry, it's easy to lose sight of what's important, but our children are watching us. They're learning from us. And it's up to us to set the right example, set boundaries, communicate openly, and most importantly, don't let your pain dictate your actions, because the consequences, for you and for your children, can be devastating. If this story made you feel something, if it made you think or question or even just pause for a moment, let me know in the comments. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Cheating Stories today for more raw, real stories like this one. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Life doesn't come with a manual, and if it did, I probably would have thrown mine out a long time ago. But if there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that we're all capable of change. We're all capable of growth. And no matter how far we fall, it's never too late to pick ourselves up and start again. Ethan and I are still figuring things out. Some days are harder than others, but for the first time in a long time, I feel like we're on solid ground. We're building something better, something healthier, and I know we'll keep moving forward one step at a time. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, if it made you think, or if it just made you feel something, let me know in the comments. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? How would you have handled the pain, the betrayal, the desperation? I want to hear your thoughts. And if you want more raw, real stories like this one, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Cheating Stories today. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Until then, take care of yourselves and each other.